Bryn didn't know that the man standing at the altar had spent 3 years searching for her. She didn't know that every spy in his kingdom had been tasked with finding a woman who matched her description. And she certainly didn't know that the moment she burst through those cathedral doors, chest heaving and mud splattered across her torn dress, she wasn't ruining his wedding. She was answering a prayer he'd whispered into the darkness every night since the blood moon. The cathedral fell silent. 500 guests turned in their gilded pews, gasps rippling through the crowd like stones dropped in still water. Bryn's fingers curled around the iron handle of the door she'd thrown open, her knuckles white, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. She'd run for 3 days to get here, 3 days through the Thornwood, across the Vale Ridge Mountains, past patrols and checkpoints and her own screaming instincts that told her this was madness, that a nobody like her had no business crashing the royal wedding of the century, that the Alpha King would have her executed before she could utter a single word. But she'd seen what she'd seen, and if there was even the smallest chance she could save an innocent woman from the same fate that had befallen her sister, she would take it, even if it killed her. The bride stood frozen at the altar, a vision in white silk and pearls, her delicate features arranged in an expression of polished confusion. Lady Isolde of House Varenne, the most sought-after noble in 3 kingdoms, the woman who was about to marry the most powerful shifter alive, and the woman whose closest handmaiden had been meeting in secret with the very people who'd destroyed Bryn's village. Bryn opened her mouth to shout her warning, to tell everyone what she knew, to damn the consequences and let the truth fall where it may. But then her eyes found the groom. The world stopped. He was already looking at her, not with the fury she'd expected, not with the cold dismissal of a king interrupted on his wedding day. No, the Alpha King of Valdris was looking at her like she was water in a desert, like she was air after drowning, like she was something precious and impossible that he'd been waiting his entire life to see. He was devastating. That was the only word for it. Tall and broad-shouldered in his ceremonial black and gold, dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on ancient coins and whispered legends. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones. A mouth that looked carved from cruelty but somehow softened as he stared at her. And his eyes. Gods above, his eyes. They were the color of molten amber, bright and burning with an intensity that made her knees threaten to buckle. They held hers across the vast cathedral, across the sea of shocked faces, across every logical reason why a king should not be looking at a bedraggled village girl like she was the answer to everything. Something tugged in her chest, something warm and golden and completely impossible. A thread she couldn't see but could feel, pulling taut between them, humming with a recognition that made no sense. No, 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 no. She hadn't come here for this. She'd come here to warn the bride and disappear. To do one good thing with her wretched life before vanishing back into the obscurity where she belonged. The Alpha King moved. He stepped away from the altar, away from his bride, and the crowd erupted into frantic whispers. The high priest sputtered in protest, his holy book dropping from nerveless fingers. Lady Isolde's perfect composure cracked, her eyes widening with something that might have been fear. But Bryn couldn't focus on any of it. She could only watch him approach, each step deliberate, predatory, until he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Close enough to see the slight tremor in his hands, quickly controlled. Close enough to hear the rough edge in his voice when he finally spoke. Finally. The word was barely more than a breath, reverent and relieved, and so painfully tender that it cracked something open in her chest. I was waiting for you. Bryn's mind went blank. I don't... What? He smiled, and it transformed his entire face from devastating to ruinous. You have no idea, do you? He lifted his hand, and she should have flinched back, should have remembered who he was and what he could do, but instead, she stood frozen as his fingers brushed her cheek with impossible gentleness. 3 years. I've been looking for you for 3 years. You don't know me. I know you better than I know my own heartbeat. His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away dirt she hadn't realized was there. I've dreamed of this face every night since the blood moon. I've felt you in my blood, in my bones, in the part of my soul that I didn't know was incomplete until you weren't there. The golden thread in her chest pulled tighter, and suddenly she understood. No, it wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Fated bonds were stories, legends. Certainly not something that connected ruined village girls to the most powerful king in the known world. You're getting married, she heard herself say, the words hollow. I came to warn the bride, her handmaiden, Sarah. She's been meeting with the Shadow Court. They're planning something. I don't know what, but I know those people. I've seen what they do, and I couldn't just... The Alpha King went still. His amber eyes flickered with something dangerous. The predator beneath his civilized surface rising close to the skin. When he turned to face the altar, his voice carried the cold authority of a man who had never been disobeyed. Lady Isolde, step down from the altar. Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video. It tells me you want more stories like this. The bride didn't move. Her porcelain composure had shattered completely now, replaced by something calculating and cornered. Her fingers tightened on her bouquet of winter roses until the stems crackled under the pressure. My king, surely you cannot take the word of this vagrant over the testimony of a noble house. I said step down. 2 words. That was all it took. The weight of an alpha command pressed through the cathedral like a physical force, and even Bryn felt her knees want to bend beneath it. Lady Isolde stumbled back from the altar, her face draining of color, her carefully constructed mask finally slipping away to reveal the calculating cruelty beneath. Guards. The Alpha King didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Find the handmaiden called Sarah, bring her to me, and seal the cathedral. No one leaves. Chaos erupted. Nobles shouted over each other, their voices bouncing off the vaulted ceilings in a cacophony of outrage and confusion. Guards rushed to obey their king, their armor clanking as they moved to block every exit. Lady Isolde was surrounded before she could take 3 steps, her protests rising to shrieks as the full weight of her situation crashed down upon her. Through it all, the Alpha King never looked away from Bryn. A guard approached, his armor gleaming in the light streaming through the stained glass windows. Your Majesty, should we take the intruder to the dungeons for questioning? Bryn's stomach dropped. Of course they would arrest her. She'd interrupted the royal wedding of the Alpha King. She'd made accusations against a noble house without proof. Whatever pull she'd felt toward this man, whatever impossible recognition had passed between them, it couldn't protect her from the consequences of what she'd done. But the king's response made the guard stumble back 3 steps. If you touch her, Caspian said, his voice dropping to something low and lethal, if anyone in this room so much as looks at her wrong, I will personally ensure they spend the rest of their very short life regretting it. The golden thread in Bryn's chest blazed hot. She is not an intruder, Caspian continued, turning back to face the shocked assembly. His voice carried to every corner of the cathedral now, commanding and absolute. She is under my protection, my personal protection, and any threat against her is a threat against the crown itself. The whispers that followed were different now. Confused, speculative. Bryn heard the word mate hissed between noble lips and felt heat climb her cheeks even as terror still gripped her heart. You're shaking, he said quietly, and she realized with distant surprise that he was right. Her entire body was trembling, the adrenaline that had carried her here finally draining away and leaving nothing but exhaustion in its wake. When did you last eat? I don't. She couldn't remember. The last few days were a blur of running and hiding and desperate determination. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He shrugged off his ceremonial jacket, the one embroidered with gold thread and probably worth more than her entire village had been, and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The weight of it was warm. It smelled like cedar and something wilder, something that made the thread in her chest hum with recognition. Everything about you matters to me, Bryn. She went rigid. How do you know my name? I told you. His smile was soft and sad and achingly patient. I've been dreaming of you for 3 years. I know your name. I know the village you came from, the one the Shadow Court burned. I know you have a sister, or you did, and that you blame yourself for what happened to her even though you shouldn't. I know you're brave enough to burst into a royal wedding to save a stranger, and I know you've spent so long surviving that you've forgotten what it feels like to be safe. Tears burned behind her eyes. She refused to let them fall. You can't know all that. The bond knows. He said it like it was the simplest truth in the world. It's been showing me pieces of you, trying to lead me to you, but you're impossible to track. You never stay anywhere long enough. You trust no one, rely on no one, and you've become very good at disappearing. Because disappearing was how she'd survived. After the attack on her village, after watching her sister dragged away by creatures that wore shadows like cloaks, after realizing that no one was coming to save her and no one ever would, she'd learned to become invisible. It was the only way to stay alive. But this man, this king, had seen her anyway, had been searching for her, had been waiting. The wedding, she managed, your political alliance, was always a farce. His jaw tightened, and she watched a muscle tick beneath the sharp line of it. House Varen approached me with the match, and I agreed because my advisors insisted that a king needs a queen and the realm needs stability. But I told Isolde the truth before we announced the engagement. I told her my heart belonged to someone I hadn't found yet, that this marriage would be one of duty only, that I would never love her because I was already bound to another. And she agreed to that? She said she did. His eyes darkened like storm clouds gathering over mountains. Now I understand why. She never intended for this marriage to last. The Shadow Court has been looking for a way to destabilize Valdris for years. What better way than to place one of their agents at the heart of the kingdom? The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Lady Isolde hadn't been an innocent victim. She'd been a willing participant. And Bryn hadn't just crashed a wedding. She'd exposed a conspiracy. You need to question her, Bryn said, her tactical mind finally engaging through the fog of exhaustion and impossible revelations. And the handmaiden. They'll have contacts, plans, names. The Shadow Court works in cells, but there's always a central figure pulling the strings. If you can find them. If we can find them, he corrected gently. This is your fight too. It always has been. You survived their attack for a reason, Bryn. Maybe this was it. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that she was no one, that she had no place in kingdoms and politics, and the machinations of power. But the golden thread in her chest sang with something that felt terrifyingly like hope, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself imagine a different kind of future. I don't even know your name, she whispered. Not really. Everyone just calls you the Alpha King. His laugh was low and warm and surprised, like he hadn't expected to laugh in the middle of this chaos. Caspian? My name is Caspian. Caspian. She tested it on her tongue, and something settled into place inside her. A puzzle piece she hadn't known was missing. I don't know how to do this. Any of this. I've never had. I know. He caught her hand, threading his fingers through hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. His palm was warm and calloused and impossibly gentle. We'll figure it out together. But first, you need rest. Food. A bath, probably. His eyes crinkled with gentle humor. You smell like you've been rolling in pine needles for a week. Despite everything, she felt her lips twitch. It was only 3 days. My mistake. The next hours passed in a blur of sensation and exhaustion. Bryn was ushered away from the cathedral by a woman who introduced herself as Marin, the head of the king's household, who looked at her with knowing eyes and asked no questions. She was bathed in water that smelled like lavender and roses, the warmth seeping into muscles she hadn't realized were knotted with tension. She was fed rich soup and fresh bread and honeyed tea that made her want to weep with gratitude. She was dressed in clothes softer than anything she'd ever touched, a simple gown of deep green that felt like wearing clouds. And through it all, that golden thread in her chest hummed with a constant awareness of where Caspian was. Interrogating Lady Isolde, meeting with his war council, issuing orders that would reshape the political landscape of 3 kingdoms, all because she'd burst through those cathedral doors. It was nearly midnight when he finally came to her. Bryn was standing at the window of the chamber she'd been given, watching the moonlight spill across the castle grounds when she felt him approach. Not heard, felt. The bond between them pulled taut and then relaxed, like a sigh of relief, and she turned to find him standing in the doorway. He'd shed his ceremonial finery for simpler clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He looked exhausted. He looked like he'd been through a war. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "May I come in? It's your castle. It's your room, for as long as you want it." He didn't move from the threshold. "I won't enter without your permission. I won't do anything without your permission. The bond doesn't give me rights to you, Bryn. Nothing does. You're a person, not a possession. And I need you to understand that before anything else." The ache in her chest expanded into something vast and overwhelming. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever treated her autonomy as something precious, something to be protected. She'd spent so long being invisible, being overlooked, being a ghost that passed through the world without touching it. This man saw her, and he was waiting for her to choose him. "Come in," she said softly. He crossed the room like he was afraid she might change her mind, stopping just close enough to touch, but not touching. This near, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides like he was fighting the urge to reach for her. "Isolde talked," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The Shadow Court has been planning this for years. They wanted the throne, yes, but more than that, they wanted you." Her blood went cold. "What?" "The attack on your village wasn't random. They were looking for someone with your bloodline. Your mother's family, generations back. They carried a specific gift. The ability to sense shadow magic. To track it. To find the creatures that hide in darkness and drag them into the light." The memories hit her like a physical blow. Her sister, always knowing when danger was close. Her mother, teaching them both to trust their instincts even when logic said otherwise. The way she'd felt the attack coming before it happened, that creeping wrongness in her bones that had driven her to run even as guilt screamed at her to stay. "They wanted to eliminate the threat," Caspian continued, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "Your sister, they captured her because they thought she was the one with the strongest gift. But she wasn't. You were. You've been using it all this time without even realizing it. That's how you've stayed hidden. That's how you've survived every trap they set, every hunter they sent after you." "My sister." The words scraped past the lump in her throat. "Is she alive?" His hands finally unclenched, and he caught her arms when she swayed. "Imprisoned, but alive. One of the names Isolde gave us was the location of their holding cells. I've already dispatched a rescue team. My best soldiers, along with a tracker who knows the terrain. By dawn, she'll be free. 3 years. Bryn's voice cracked on the words. 3 years I thought she was gone. I mourned her. I lit candles for her soul on every anniversary of the attack. I carried that guilt with me everywhere, the weight of leaving her behind. You didn't leave her behind. Caspian's voice was fierce. You survived. You escaped a massacre that was specifically designed to eliminate your bloodline. And then you spent 3 years staying one step ahead of hunters who never stopped looking for you. That's not abandonment. That's survival. And because you survived, because you made it to this cathedral today, your sister will be free by morning. She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of judgment or pity. She found neither. Only understanding. Only the bone-deep recognition of someone who knew what it meant to carry impossible choices. How do you do that? She whispered. Do what? Make everything feel like it might actually be okay. His smile was soft, touched with sadness. I spent 3 years dreaming of you, Bryn. I had a lot of time to practice what I might say when I finally found you. Bryn's knees buckled. Caspian caught her before she could fall, lowering them both to the floor and gathering her against his chest as 3 years of grief and guilt and desperate hope finally broke through the walls she'd built around them. She sobbed into his shirt, ugly and raw and completely uncontrolled, and he held her through all of it. His hand stroked her hair, his lips pressed against her temple. His voice murmured soft, meaningless comfort while she shattered and reformed into something new. When the tears finally stopped, she was wrung out and empty, and somehow more whole than she'd felt in years. I'm sorry, she croaked. I got your shirt wet. I have other shirts. His arms tightened around her. Besides, I think you've earned a few tears. You've been carrying this alone for too long. I didn't have a choice. You do now. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and what she saw in his gaze made her breath catch. Devotion. Patience. A love that had been growing for 3 years in the soil of dreams and faith. Stay with me. Not because of the bond, not because of politics or prophecy or any of the 1,000 reasons my advisors will come up with. Stay because you want to, because you're tired of running, because maybe, just maybe, you might want to see what happens next. I don't know how to be a queen. Neither do I, really. I've been making it up as I go along. His smile was crooked and self-deprecating and utterly disarming. We can figure it out together, if you want. She looked at this man who had stopped his own wedding for her, who had searched for her across years and kingdoms, who held her like she was precious while asking for nothing but permission. The golden thread in her chest sang. Yes, she whispered. I want. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question and an answer wrapped together. His lips were warm against hers, gentle in a way that made her heart ache, and when she pressed closer, when she buried her fingers in his hair and kissed him back with all the desperate hope she'd been afraid to feel, he made a sound low in his throat that vibrated through her entire body. The bond between them blazed to life. It was like touching lightning, like stepping into sunlight after years of darkness. She felt him in her blood, in her bones, in every fiber of her being, and she knew he felt her the same way. Two halves of a whole, finally complete. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers and his amber eyes were bright with unshed tears. I knew, he said roughly. I knew you'd be worth the wait. The days that followed were a whirlwind of revelation and reunion. Lysara, Bryn's sister, arrived at the castle 3 days after the failed wedding. She was thinner than Bryn remembered, pale and haunted by her time in captivity. But the moment she saw Bryn standing in the courtyard, something in her face cracked open with joy. They collided in a tangle of arms and tears and incoherent words, holding each other like they'd never let go. I thought you were gone, Lysara sobbed against Bryn's shoulder. They told me you were gone, that I was the only one left. They lied. Bryn pulled back to cup her sister's face, drinking in every familiar feature. I tried to find you. For so long I tried, but they hid you so well, and I didn't have... You found me. Lysara's smile was watery but real. You crashed a royal wedding, and you found me. Caspian stood at a respectful distance, watching the reunion with an expression that made Bryn's heart clench. When she caught his eye, he simply nodded, a silent promise that they had all the time in the world. In the weeks that followed, Bryn learned what it meant to be part of something larger than survival. She trained with the royal mages, learning to harness the gift that ran in her blood. The first time she successfully tracked a shadow creature through the castle's training grounds, pinpointing its location with nothing but the wrongness prickling across her skin. She'd laughed until tears streamed down her face. All those years of running, of trusting instincts she didn't understand, and it had been this. A gift. A weapon. Something that made her valuable instead of vulnerable. She stood beside Caspian in war councils, offering insights from her years of running and hiding that his noble-born advisors couldn't provide. They'd looked at her skeptically at first, this mud-spattered village girl seated at the king's right hand. But after she'd predicted 3 Shadow Court ambushes in a single week, after her warnings had saved dozens of soldiers' lives, the skepticism turned to grudging respect. And then, slowly, to something warmer. She watched her sister slowly heal, finding her own place in the castle's hierarchy. Lysara had always been the gentler one, the one who preferred books to blades, and she'd found unexpected purpose in the castle's archives. The ancient texts held records of their bloodlines stretching back centuries, and she spent her days piecing together the history they'd never known. Their mother had hidden so much from them, trying to protect them from a legacy that had chased them anyway. And through it all, the bond between her and Caspian deepened into something unshakable. He never pushed, never demanded. He waited for her to come to him, whether it was for strategic discussions or quiet moments stolen in the garden, or the kisses that grew longer and more desperate as the weeks passed. He let her set the pace, and somehow that patience made her trust him more completely than force ever could have. 2 months later, the kingdom celebrated. Not a wedding. Not yet. Bryn had insisted on that, and Caspian had agreed without hesitation. She needed time. Time to learn this new life. Time to reconnect with Lysara, who had emerged from captivity scarred but unbroken and was slowly healing in the castle's sunny gardens. Time to train the gift she'd never understood, working with the royal mages to hone her ability to track shadow magic into something that could be wielded rather than just survived. But today was a celebration, nonetheless. The Shadow Court's main enclave had been destroyed. Their leaders were in chains. The creatures they'd unleashed upon Valdris for years were being hunted down one by one, tracked by a woman who could feel their wrongness in her bones, and a king who refused to let her face the darkness alone. Bryn stood on the castle balcony, watching the festivities in the courtyard below. Music drifted up on the warm summer air, mingling with laughter and the smell of roasting meat and sweet pastries. Lysara was down there somewhere, dancing with one of the younger knights who had been making moon eyes at her for weeks. The kingdom was healing, her family was safe, and behind her, Caspian's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. "You're thinking too hard," he murmured against her hair. "I'm thinking about how strange this all is." She leaned into him, marveling, as she always did, at how right it felt. How easy. 2 months ago, I was a ghost. Now I'm my partner, my equal, the woman who saved my kingdom by crashing my wedding in a muddy dress and terror in her eyes. She felt him smile against her temple. Still the bravest person I've ever met. Or the most foolish. Perhaps both. He turned her in his arms, tilting her chin up so he could look at her properly. The love in his eyes still stole her breath every time. I have something for you. Caspian, you've already given me too much. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside, nestled against dark velvet, was a ring. Simple and elegant, a band of gold set with a single amber stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light. I'm not proposing, he said quickly, seeing her expression. I know you're not ready for that yet, and I'll wait as long as you need. But I wanted you to have something, a promise, a symbol of what you mean to me. He pulled the ring from the box and held it out to her. This belonged to my mother. She told me to give it to the woman who owned my heart. She would have loved you, I think. She always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me get away with anything. Bryn's vision blurred with tears. Happy ones, this time. The kind she was still learning how to cry. She held out her hand, and he slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling reverence. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. I love you, she said, the words coming easier now than they had the first time she'd said them. Easier than she'd ever imagined words could be. I love you, and I'm done running. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with you. Whatever comes next, he agreed, and kissed her under the setting sun while the kingdom celebrated below. The golden bond between them hummed with contentment, with belonging, with the quiet certainty that some things were meant to be. The girl who had burst into a wedding to save a stranger had found something she'd stopped believing in years ago. Home, not a place, a person, a bond, a kingdom that had opened its arms to her despite her tattered dress and wild accusations. A sister returned from the dead. A purpose that transformed her curse into a blessing, and a king who looked at her every morning like he still couldn't believe she was real. A future that stretched out before her, full of challenges and dangers and all the beautiful ordinary moments in between. She would face shadow courts and political intrigue, and the weight of a crown she'd never asked for. She would learn and grow and occasionally fail, but she wouldn't do it alone. Never again. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts. And if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.